The storm had started just after midnight, one of those violent, unpredictable tempests that made the guards curse the night shift and prisoners whisper about omens. Lightning tore open the sky above Razor Ridge State Prison, illuminating the yard in harsh white flashes. Most inmates lay curled under thin blankets, counting the seconds between thunder. But not Elias Rowan. He sat awake on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, hands clasped tight enough to make the knuckles pale. For months, he'd watched the storm patterns. For weeks, he'd memorized guard rotations. For days, he'd studied the weak points in the aging perimeter fence. And for hours, he'd replayed the letter he'd received from a former neighbor, a letter that spoke of Marla laughing with another man. That single image had burned a hole straight through his sanity, turning rage into fuel and heartbreak into a mission. When the siren flickered, sputtering from the lightning strike that momentarily killed the power, Elias rose. The dim backup lights cast a ghostly glow as he slipped out of his cell the moment the guard turned down the corridor. His heart hammered, not from fear, but from clarity, dangerous clarity. He knew what he was doing. He knew why. And he no longer cared about consequences. Outside, the rain was relentless. Sheets of water pounded the ground so hard it felt like the earth itself trembled. Elias kept to the shadows, hugging the wall that bordered the yard. He paused behind a dumpster, peering around the corner. The guard tower was temporarily blinded, the floodlights flickered with each surge of lightning. His breath fogged in front of him as he whispered to himself, "This is it. No turning back now." He darted across the yard, boots splashing in puddles that had formed in the uneven ground. The cold rain soaked him instantly, but he barely noticed. His eyes were locked on the dark outline of the fence ahead, tall, foreboding, crowned with rusted coils of razor wire. Another flash of lightning revealed the spot he'd seen weeks earlier, a section of the chain link bent downward from years of weather and neglect. Not enough for most men to risk, but Elias wasn't most men. He dropped to his knees, fingers digging into the mud as he pulled the metal down with every ounce of strength left in his arms. The storm masked the metallic groan of the fence giving way. He squeezed through, ignoring the sting of wires slicing his forearms. Blood mixed with rainwater, trailing behind him in thin ribbons. His breathing grew ragged, but his pace didn't slow. He didn't allow himself to feel pain, not yet. Not until he reached her. Once beyond the boundary, he sprinted into the tree lean, swallowed by darkness. The forest was dense, branches whipping at his face as he moved. He stopped only when he reached a fallen log, collapsing behind it to catch his breath. The storm raged above, but under the canopy, the sound felt muffled, distant, almost unreal. For a moment, in the half-quiet, he thought about Marla the way she used to be. Soft laughter, warm hands, the two of them sitting on their old porch while she leaned her head against his shoulder. He felt his jaw trembling. He hadn't cried in years, not since the prison gates clanged shut behind him. But the thought of her with someone else. "That's why I'm doing this," he muttered, wiping the rain from his eyes. "She owes me the truth." Thunder cracked overhead. Elias tightened his fists, grounding himself. The cold wind whipped through the trees, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant asphalt. Somewhere out there, beyond the forest, lay highways, towns, strangers and danger. And beyond all of it, 740 miles away, Marla. He didn't know how long it would take. 5 weeks. It didn't matter. The distance was a number, nothing more. The journey was already carved into his mind, as inevitable as the storm. Elias stood, water dripping from his hair, shirt clinging to his skin. "I'm coming home," he whispered, a promise, a threat, a confession. Behind him, faint alarms began to rise from the prison, muffled through the trees but unmistakably real. Flashlights cut through the yard as guards scrambled, shouting, radios buzzing. But Elias was already moving deeper into the woods, swallowed by shadows. The fence that should have held him no longer existed. And by dawn, neither would the life Marla thought she had rebuilt. The storm still lingered in the distance when morning light crept over Willow Creek, the small town Elias once called home. Long before the alarms echoed through Razor Ridge State Prison, before officers realized an inmate had slipped past them, Marla Rowan stood at her kitchen sink, staring out the window at the gray sky. She didn't know it yet, but Elias was already hours into his escape, moving toward her with the same certainty he once reserved for loving her. Marla held a coffee mug between her palms, but the drink had gone cold. She wasn't really drinking. She was thinking about the years that had molded her into someone she didn't recognize. The person she became after Elias' conviction wasn't the woman he'd married. Maybe that was part of why she drifted, why the loneliness eventually swallowed her whole. On the counter beside her lay a letter she'd written months earlier but never mailed. It was only a small paragraph, an apology Elias would never receive. Not because she hadn't meant it, but because she knew it would change nothing. Their marriage had died long before prison bars separated them. She ran her thumb across the envelope. "I'm sorry, Elias. I'm sorry for becoming a stranger to you." The words felt hollow now. A knock sounded at the door, sharp and quick. Marla set the mug down and wiped her hands on her jeans before opening it. A middle-aged neighbor, Mrs. Haywood, stood on her porch holding a folded newspaper under her arm. "Morning, Marla," she said, eyes soft but cautious. "You doing all right?" "Yeah," Marla replied automatically. "Just tired." Mrs. Haywood hesitated before speaking again. "I heard on the radio there was trouble at the prison last night. Power outage. Some kind of incident." Her voice dropped. "You think he's okay in there?" Marla swallowed hard. "I don't know." Even after everything, her neighbors still thought she cared. Maybe part of her still did, but not in the way they imagined. It wasn't love anymore. It was something heavier, a mixture of dread and guilt and memories that refused to fade. As soon as the door closed, her composure cracked. She leaned back against the wall, covering her face with her hands. Images of Elias, before violence, before prison, flashed across her mind. His smile. His quiet devotion. The way he used to touch her cheek when she cried, whispering, "You're all I've got, Marla. Don't forget that." But she had forgotten. Or maybe she tried so hard to forget that she erased parts of herself along the way. Their marriage had started like a promise and ended like a wound. The long nights waiting for him to come home from dangerous construction jobs, the arguments about money, the silence that settled between them like dust, those were the early cracks. But prison was the breaking point. Visiting days turned cold. Letters felt accusatory. Loneliness became unbearable. And then Connor appeared. Marla hated how easily she'd fallen into the comfort he offered, hated how quickly affection turned into something more. But she'd also been starved for warmth, for attention, for a voice that didn't blame her for every misfortune. Elias had given her passion, loyalty, and turmoil. Connor gave her stability, or at least the illusion of it. She exhaled shakily, turning away from the memories. She didn't notice the faint tremor in her hands until the mug rattled against the counter. Her phone buzzed. A news alert flashed on the screen. Power failure at Razor Ridge. Manhunt underway for missing inmate. Her blood turned cold. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. No, it couldn't be him. Not Elias. Not after all these years. But deep down she knew. She whispered into the quiet kitchen, "Please, please don't let it be him." Outside, the storm clouds thinned, letting in a weak strip of sunlight. But the warmth didn't reach her. Because she knew that if Elias was free, he wasn't running from something. He was running to her. And miles away, in the dripping silence of a forest clearing, Elias stepped onto a lonely stretch of road, beginning the first 100 miles of his journey. Dawn spread slowly across the two-lane highway, pale and washed out, the kind of morning that carried no warmth, only the truth of a long road stretching endlessly forward. Elias stepped onto the shoulder, his clothes still damp from the storm, his boots heavy with mud. The air smelled of wet asphalt and pine. Behind him lay the forest he'd slipped through. Ahead lay the world that had moved on without him. He adjusted the torn sleeve covering the cut on his arm. The wound burned, but he welcomed the pain. It kept him awake. It kept him focused. It kept him angry. Cars passed occasionally, mostly commuters heading toward towns he didn't remember the names of anymore. Each engine roar made him stiffen, ready to bolt into the trees if anyone slowed. But no one did. To them, he was just another drifter, Another man walking with nowhere to go. As the sun climbed higher, exhaustion began to drag on him. His legs trembled. His mouth felt dry, metallic. He had walked miles since the prison, driven by nothing but adrenaline and memory. Memory of Marla. Memory of betrayal. Memory of everything he'd lost. By mid-morning, a rumbling diesel engine grew louder behind him. A beat-up blue semi slowed before easing onto the shoulder. Elias froze. The passenger side window rolled down, and a broad-shouldered man with sunburned cheeks leaned out. "You look like hell, friend," he called. "Need a lift?" Elias studied him. The man didn't look like a threat, just tired, kind, the sort who trusted too easily. But trust was a weakness Elias had long abandoned. Still, he nodded. The driver unlocked the door. "Up in." "Name's Jude." Elias climbed in, the warmth of the cab hitting him like a shock. Jude eyed the cuts on his arm. "You get in a fight with the storm last night?" he joked. Elias forced a half smile. "Something like that." Jude shifted the truck back onto the road, humming along to an old country song playing on the radio. For a while, neither spoke. The cab smelled faintly of coffee and engine grease. Elias watched the trees blur past, imagining the distance between him and Marla shrinking with every mile. After 10 minutes, Jude glanced at him again. "Where you headed?" Elias kept his gaze forward. "North. Long way from here." "You got family up north?" A beat of silence. Elias' jaw clenched. "Something like that." Jude didn't push. He took a sip from his thermos before offering it. "Coffee?" Elias accepted it, letting the heat settle his shaking hands. The bitterness grounded him. It made him feel almost human again. "You know," Jude said lightly, "I pick up hitchhikers every now and then. Folks running from jobs, bad breakups, rough luck. But you," he paused, studying Elias carefully. "You look like you're running to something." The comment slid under Elias' skin. He turned slowly, meeting Jude's eyes. For a moment, the cab felt too small, the air too thick. "I'm going where I need to go," Elias replied quietly. Something in his tone made Jude look back to the road fast, hands tightening on the wheel. The easy friendliness faded, replaced by caution. Elias sensed it. He didn't blame him. People always sensed when danger was close. They just didn't know what form it would take. They drove another 20 miles in tense silence. Finally, Jude cleared his throat. "This is as far as I go," he said, pulling into a diner parking lot. "Fuel stop." Elias nodded. He climbed out, tightening the jacket Jude had given him. Before he left, Jude leaned out the window. "Whatever you're heading into, I hope you make peace with it." Elias didn't look back. "Peace isn't what I'm after." Jude watched him walk away, unease settling deep in his gut, an instinct he knew better than to ignore. Elias stepped onto the next stretch of road, the wind cold against his neck. 100 miles were behind him. But Marla's new life, the one he intended to shatter, was waiting just beyond the next horizon. Marla didn't leave the house that morning. Not after seeing the news alert about the missing inmate. Not after the uneasy silence that settled into the walls like a second skin. She paced the living room, arms wrapped around herself, trying to convince her mind that the world was still safe, still predictable. But Elias had always been unpredictable. Even in their marriage, the calmest moments were only pauses between storms. The sunlight through the window was thin, barely touching the floorboards. Marla glanced outside every few minutes, searching for anything out of place. Every passing car made her chest tighten. Every distant bark or slamming door snapped her nerves. By noon, she finally sat at the dining table, but her hands trembled too much to eat. She kept checking her phone, expecting another alert, a call, some sort of confirmation. Please don't let it be him, she thought again. But the silence was its own answer. A soft knock sounded at the back door, gentle, familiar. Marla jumped, pulse racing. "Marla? It's me." She exhaled shakily as Connor Hale stepped inside, closing the door behind him. His presence always brought a quiet steadiness, though today even that felt fragile. He set his keys on the counter and moved toward her, concern etched across his face. "You look pale," he said, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "What's going on?" She hesitated, then handed him the phone. The headline glared back. "Manhunt underway after inmate escapes during storm." Connor's expression shifted, the calm thinning into something sharper. "Elias." "Yes," she whispered. "I don't know if it's him, but I feel like it is." Connor pulled out a chair and sat beside her. "They'll catch him," he said, though the tightness in his jaw betrayed doubt. "He wouldn't come all this way. It's been years." "You don't know him," she replied, voice trembling. If there was one thing Elias could do, really do, it was hold on to something long after it was over. Connor looked at her for a long moment. "Do you ever worry he'll find out about us?" She stared at her hands. "I worry about it every day." Their relationship had never been simple. It wasn't meant to be. Connor had stepped into her life during one of her loneliest seasons, offering stability she desperately needed. But stability came with secrets, his and hers. He was still technically married, trapped in a miserable arrangement he hadn't found the courage to end. Marla had known this, yet she'd stayed. And now she feared she would pay for every choice she made. Connor stood, pacing. "We should go to the police again, tell them everything." She shook her head quickly. "Not everything. They don't need to know about us. Not now. Marla, if he finds you—" "I know," she cut in. "But telling the police about our situation won't protect me. It'll just complicate everything." Connor paused, jaw tight. "Then at least let me stay here a few days. I'll sleep on the couch. I don't want you alone." For the first time that day, she felt a fragile thread of relief. "Okay." Connor stepped closer, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll get through this," he murmured. But Marla didn't answer. She looked past him, through the window, at the quiet street that felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. Somewhere, miles away, Elias was walking with a purpose she understood all too well. And by nightfall, he would take shelter in an abandoned cabin, nursing his wounds and feeding the storm growing inside him. Elias found the cabin just as dusk began swallowing the sky. It sat crooked at the edge of an overgrown field, half collapsed from years of storms and neglect. To anyone else, it would look abandoned, unsafe, barely standing. But to Elias, it was shelter. A temporary sanctuary. A place where the shadows could settle and his thoughts could sharpen. He pushed the creaking door open, the smell of rot and damp would hitting him like a wave. Leaves littered the floor, and the roof sagged dangerously in the corner. He stepped inside anyway. His body ached from hours of walking, the muscles in his legs twitching from exhaustion. The wound on his arm throbbed beneath the torn fabric. He dropped onto a broken chair and exhaled through clenched teeth. Marla's new life, he thought. A life built on lies. A life she made without me. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, carrying faint echoes of branches scraping against the roof. Elias leaned forward, running a hand over his face. His fingers trembled, not with fear, but with a volatile mix of anger and longing. He hated that he still wanted her. Hated that her betrayal hurt more than any prison beating or sentence ever could. From his pocket he pulled out the crumpled letter, the one hinting at her infidelity. He'd read it so many times the paper had softened, edges worn thin. "Saw her with a guy. Not sure who. Doesn't look like she misses you much." Those words had stuck to the inside of his skull like barbed wire. "Who is he, Marla?" Elias whispered into the empty cabin. "What did he give you that I didn't?" His voice cracked, surprising him. He tightened his jaw, swallowing the swell of emotion. Tears wouldn't help him now. Regret wouldn't help him. Only focus, cold, sharpened focus, would carry him the rest of the way. He stood and moved toward the old fireplace. Someone had left behind firewood, brittle but usable. Soon, a small flame flickered to life, sending dim, wavering light across the walls. The warmth seeped into him slowly, like a memory he didn't want to acknowledge. As the fire grew, he stared into it, thinking of her face, how she used to look at him when they were young. Back then, her gaze held tenderness, trust. He'd built his whole world around that look. But prison stripped it away. Letters grew shorter. Visits became rare. The last time she came, she couldn't even meet his eyes. The fire spat embers. Elias felt something shift inside him, something heavy, irreversible. He rose and paced the cabin. The anger he'd carried for years took shape inside his chest, no longer a feeling but a presence. The more he thought of Marla, the more the presence grew. She chose to forget me, he murmured. She chose him. The fire crackled sharply as if answering him. Elias walked to the window. The field outside lay quiet under the darkening sky. For a moment, he imagined Marla's house, warm lights, someone else's boots by her door, someone else's hand on her waist. A flash of stormlight illuminated his face in the glass, revealing the exhaustion etched into his features. He barely recognized the man staring back. Not the husband he once was. Not even the convict he'd become. Maybe I died in that prison, he said softly. Maybe that version of me is gone. His reflection flickered with the flame. But you should have stayed dead to her, he added, the words growing colder. Instead, she moved on. Like I never existed. He pressed his forehead against the window, letting the chill steady him. Outside, a police siren wailed faintly somewhere in the distance, too far to matter. Elias didn't flinch. He had no intention of being caught. Not yet. Not until he saw her face again. Not until he made her understand what she'd done. He returned to the fire, warming his hands. Tomorrow he would keep walking. Tomorrow he would get closer. Tomorrow the past would begin its march toward Marla's door. For now, he let the fire fade and the darkness settle. And in that darkness, he made a silent promise. He was coming for them, Marla and the man she'd replaced him with. Connor didn't follow Marla inside immediately. For a moment he stood on the porch, jaw tight, watching the last streaks of sunlight sink behind the trees. From inside the cabin, Marla could hear his boots shifting on the wooden boards, slow, hesitant, like he was fighting something inside himself. She didn't call out. After the way he'd appeared on that dirt road and the story he'd told her about finding her by accident, she wasn't sure what pressing him any further would reveal or break. When he finally stepped in, he tried to act normal. He hung his jacket, dropped his keys into the bowl by the door, and asked her if she wanted tea. But the nervous energy clinging to him was impossible to ignore. Connor had never been this fidgety, not even when they first married, and he was still learning how to talk about his feelings without sounding like he was reading from a manual. Tonight, he seemed scared of his own shadow. Marla watched him closely. "You followed me here," she said quietly, not as an accusation but as a fact she could now feel in her bones. Connor froze, teabag halfway to the cup. "I didn't," he said too quickly. "I swear, Marla, I didn't even know where." "Stop." Her voice didn't rise. "Please don't lie to me again. I can handle the truth. I can't handle pretending." He set the cup down slowly, hands trembling. For a long moment, he stared at the worn wooden table, as if waiting for the courage to speak. When he finally lifted his head, his face looked older than she remembered, like the last few months had carved a canyon through him. "I didn't follow you," he said softly. "I tracked you." The word hit harder than she expected. Marla sat down, steadying her breath. "Connor's house." He swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. "After you left, everything fell apart. My job, my sleep, my head. I kept thinking something had happened to you, that you were hurt or worse. And when I realized you were actually gone, I panicked. I got desperate. I looked through the house for anything you might have left behind. You didn't leave a goodbye note, but you left your old tablet." Her heart thudded once, painfully. "I thought it was dead," she whispered. "It was. But I charged it," he continued. "I shouldn't have. I know that. But when it powered on, your location sync was still active from when we shared accounts years ago." His voice cracked. "I didn't mean to invade your privacy. I needed to know you were alive." Marla pressed her fingers to her forehead. She wanted to be angry, should be angry, but there was something hollow, broken in his confession that diffused the fury before it could rise. "You came all this way because you thought I was dying?" she asked. "No," he said, stepping closer. "I came because I couldn't stand the thought that you were starting over without knowing the truth about me." The air shifted. Marla's breath caught. "What truth?" she asked. Connor struggled for the words, eyes glistening. The night before you left. I didn't tell you why I shut down. Why I got so cold. You thought it was you, or the marriage, or everything breaking apart. He took a slow breath. But it was something else. Something I've hidden for a long time. Something that explains everything. Marla felt her pulse quicken. Connor, what are you talking about? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I've been keeping a secret that could destroy both of us. Before she could respond, a knock echoed through the cabin. Marla turned toward the door. Connor went pale. By the time night fell, Elias had walked nearly 200 miles. His boots were caked with mud, his legs screaming from every step, yet he refused to slow. Each mile carried him closer to Marla, closer to the truth that had haunted him for years. The forest opened into a desolate stretch of road where few cars passed, and he welcomed the silence. Only the wind in the trees and the distant howl of a coyote accompanied him. He had stopped at an abandoned gas station to scavenge what little he could find: cans of beans, a half-empty bottle of water, a flashlight, and it was there he encountered the first real obstacle of his journey. A hunter had been using the station as a temporary shelter, his rifle leaning casually against the wall. Hey, what are you doing? The man barked, eyes widening at the sight of Elias. Elias froze, hands instinctively reaching toward the small hunting knife strapped to his belt. His mind raced. This was a threat, a potential delay, a person standing between him and the only thing that mattered. I'm just passing through, Elias said evenly, keeping his tone low but steady. Passing through? The hunter repeated, suspicion sharpening his voice. No one just walks these woods at night. Not without a reason. Elias studied him, the anger and hunger coiling tighter in his chest. In another life, he might have smiled, nodded, walked away. Tonight was not that night. In a flash, the knife was drawn. The man lunged, but Elias' years of suppressed rage gave him strength, precision, speed. In a few brutal moments, the hunter lay unconscious, bruised and bleeding, the kind of temporary casualty Elias deemed necessary to continue his mission. Breathing hard, Elias straightened, wiping the rain from his knife. He didn't celebrate the act. He didn't feel triumph. Only the cold, electric rush of survival and the grim satisfaction that the path forward was clear again. The storm of emotions inside him mirrored the storm outside. As he continued, he thought of Marla. Every step was haunted by her face, her laughter, her betrayal. He imagined her with another man, with someone else's arms holding her safe while his prison years had left him empty and broken. The injustice, the loss, the betrayal, all of it pressed down, making his legs move faster, his eyes sharper. The road twisted through a small town where a lone night worker spotted him at the edge of the street. Elias moved quickly, but a brief flash of movement startled the man, who tripped over a curb. Elias hesitated, considering whether to flee or confront him. The brief encounter ended with the man shaken but alive, a warning to himself. His obsession was growing, his moral restraint fraying. By the time he reached a small clearing under the highway overpass, Elias paused to rest. His shirt clung to his back, soaked from rain and sweat. Mud streaked his face. His hands trembled as he lit a small fire from debris he'd collected. Shadows danced on his features, half human, half predator, reflecting the man he'd become, a relentless force driven by the ghosts of love lost. He leaned against a concrete pillar, scanning the road ahead. The thought that Marla was just days away from this path consumed him. She didn't know it yet, but each mile he walked carried the weight of the lives he would encounter, the danger he would leave behind. The road was empty. The storm had passed. But the bodies, the casualties of his obsession, would trail behind him, silent witnesses to the price of betrayal. And somewhere far away, Detective Riley Hart began piecing together the trail he left, unaware of the full storm heading toward Marla's doorstep. Detective Riley Hart stared at the map spread across the small table in her office. Pins marked the locations of recent sightings, abandoned cabins, and a scattering of small towns where people had reported a lone man walking along the highway. She rubbed her temple, fatigue pulling at her every thought. Years on the force had taught her to recognize patterns, to see the invisible thread connecting crimes. But Elias Rowan's escape was different, personal, obsessive, and terrifyingly focused. Her phone buzzed. A dispatcher's voice crackled through the line. "Hart, we've got another sighting, mile marker 142, northbound. Witness says the man is moving on foot, alone, and looks intense." Hart pinched the bridge of her nose. "I'm on it." She grabbed her coat, keys, and the folder of reports compiled over the last 24 hours. Every piece of information, every phone tip, every eyewitness description, had to be connected before he reached someone vulnerable. Driving through the rain-slicked streets, she ran the sequence in her mind: Razor Ridge, escape, Forest Road, small-town encounters. He wasn't just moving randomly. He was heading somewhere, a place he had chosen, and it could only mean one thing: someone waiting, someone he held in his mind like a target. Marla. The thought tightened her chest. She had read the case files before she even arrived at the Rowan residence. Hart knew the woman's history with Elias, the betrayal, the obsession that had defined him. And now, that history was about to collide with the present. At the Rowan house, Marla's front door opened before Hart could knock. She appeared pale, eyes wide, fingers nervously clutching the doorframe. "Detective Hart," she whispered. He's on the move. I can feel it." Hart nodded briskly, scanning the street. "I need you to stay calm and inside. Do not go near the windows. Understand?" "Yes," Marla replied, her voice trembling. Inside, Hart spread the map across Marla's kitchen table, finger tracing the miles Elias had traveled so far. "He's been using back roads and forest paths. We think he's avoiding populated areas, but he's smart. He moves fast when people aren't looking. He's following a trail that's almost like a direct line to you." Marla flinched. "How far is he from here?" Hart counted silently, then answered, voice low. "A day's walk, maybe less, depending on conditions. He's relentless, Marla. This isn't random. It's targeted. And every mile he covers brings him closer." Marla pressed a hand to her mouth. I don't even know where to go." Hart's tone softened, though her eyes never left the map. "Right now, you stay put. I'll coordinate with local units. We'll track him, anticipate his moves. But you also need to prepare yourself mentally. This man, he's dangerous, but he's predictable in his obsession." She paused. "And Connor?" "He stays with you," Hart said firmly. "He can't be out on his own. And neither can you. This is going to be difficult, but we'll do everything to prevent him from getting inside this house." Marla nodded, swallowing hard, her gaze drifting to the window. Outside, the world seemed deceptively calm, still wet from the earlier storm, empty streets reflecting dim lamplight. Yet Hart could see the tension in Marla's posture, the realization that danger was coming closer with every step, every heartbeat. Hart straightened, folding the map. "I've traced his route. We know his tendencies. He's leaving a trail and we'll follow it. But you need to stay alert. Elias isn't just walking, he's hunting. And when he reaches this town, he's coming for you." A low shiver ran through Marla as she stared at the empty road. Somewhere beyond the trees and fields, Elias was moving. Closer. Night fell like a heavy curtain over Willow Creek, swallowing streets and houses in a thick, suffocating darkness. Marla sat on the couch, blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the faint glow of her phone screen. Each alert, each distant siren in the night, made her flinch. Connor sat nearby, tense, hands clasped tightly together, eyes darting to every shadow the dim lamp cast on the walls. The storm from days before had left the power lines unstable. At exactly 10:17 p.m., the lights flickered once, twice, and then went out entirely. The house sank into black silence. Only the hum of the refrigerator remained, along with the whisper of wind scraping against the windows. Marla's breath caught. "Connor," she whispered, voice trembling. Connor's hand found hers in the dark. "I'm here. It's just the storm." She wanted to believe him, but every nerve in her body screamed that it wasn't the storm she feared. It was the knowledge that Elias was moving closer. Every mile he covered had a purpose, and she was the target. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked louder than normal. She heard a faint sound outside, a footstep, quick and deliberate. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She strained her ears. The wind howled again, masking the soft shuffle, but she knew it. Someone was near. Connor grabbed a flashlight from the drawer, flicking it on. The beam cut across the room, illuminating worn furniture, the shadows dancing on the walls. "Stay here," he said firmly. "Don't move." Marla's hands shook as she nodded. The darkness seemed to thicken around her, pressing into her lungs, stealing her voice. The house that had once felt safe now felt like a cage with the predators circling outside. Connor stepped toward the window, pressing the flashlight against the glass. The yard was empty, or so it seemed, yet the wet grass reflected a faint shimmer, a shadow that moved unnaturally across the edge of the property line. He tensed, whispering, "Someone's out there." "I know it." Marla pressed herself to the wall, trying to make herself smaller, invisible. The silence of the house was broken only by her own shallow breaths and the occasional gust rattling the windows. Every creak, every whisper of wind, seemed amplified. A loud bang from the back door made them both jump. Connor swung the flashlight toward the sound, revealing nothing but the empty porch swinging in the wind. "He's testing us," Marla whispered, fear threading her words. "He wants us to know he's here." Connor's jaw tightened. "I won't let him in." The minutes stretched, each second dripping with tension. Shadows shifted across the living room as the flashlight beam cut through the darkness. The house no longer smelled like home. It smelled like damp wood and fear, coated with the metallic tang of adrenaline. Marla's mind raced through memories, Elias' face from years ago, the letters he'd written, the way he had loved and hated so completely. She realized that none of it had prepared her for this moment. Knowing he was inches away, yet invisible, silent, unstoppable. The wind howled again, and with it came the faintest scrape of metal along wood, a sound almost imperceptible. Marla gasped. Connor's hand tightened around hers, the flashlight sweeping toward the back of the house. Somewhere, just beyond the darkness, Elias was moving. Watching. Calculating. Every instinct, every mile he had walked, every moment of rage and obsession had led him to this precise night. Marla shivered, heart hammering in her chest. She pressed her face to Connor's shoulder. "He's here," she whispered. Outside, a shadow slipped between trees, unseen yet tangible, a predator finally closing in. And in the silence of the powerless house, the first confrontation was only moments away. By midnight, Elias had crept close enough to see the lights of Marla's house through the trees. His boots were soaked, his clothes torn from branches and brambles, and his body screamed with fatigue. But the exhaustion didn't matter. Not anymore. Every aching muscle, every cut and bruise, every drop of blood he had spilled and endured, it had all led to this moment. The journey had been merciless. 740 miles of back roads, forest trails, and abandoned highways, each step a testament to his obsession. He had left a trail of chaos in his wake, minor encounters escalating into consequences for anyone unlucky enough to cross his path. He had survived storms, hunger, and isolation. He had survived himself. And now, the final mile stretched before him like a dark ribbon, carrying him to her door. He paused at the edge of the property, crouched low in the shadows. The rain from earlier had returned in a light drizzle, coating the ground in slick mud. His eyes adjusted to the dim glow of the porch light and the soft outline of Connor moving in the living room. Elias didn't rush. He didn't need to. Every second, every careful breath, sharpened his focus. Inside, Marla was barely able to keep herself upright. The storm of anticipation had hollowed her out. She clutched Connor's arm, whispering, "He's here. I can feel it." Connor's voice was tight, restrained. "Stay calm. Just stay calm. Let me handle this." Elias watched them from the edge of the yard. The sight of Marla, alive, unaware of how close she was to the end of this chapter, ignited the rage that had fueled his journey. But beneath the fury, there was an undeniable longing, a pull toward the woman who had both ruined and defined his life. The past, the love, the betrayal, All of it was distilled into the narrow space between him and her. He moved like a shadow, silent on wet grass, around the side of the house. Each step was precise, measured, calculated. Years of planning, prison survival, and obsession had culminated in this single act. He didn't just want to confront her. He needed her to see him, to know that every mile he had walked, every injury, every sleepless night, had been for her, and because of her. The back door loomed, a simple wooden barrier between him and the life he was determined to reclaim or destroy. He knelt, checking for the weak latch he had remembered from an old visit long before prison. The lock gave way with a soft click, and he slipped inside. The smell of the house hit him immediately. Coffee, faint perfume, tension. He paused, listening. Marla's whisper, Connor's restrained voice, the shallow breathing in the darkened room. Every sound was amplified in the quiet, every heartbeat audible. He emerged from the shadows into the kitchen, flashlight in hand, eyes locked on the pair. For a moment, the world seemed suspended. No rain, no wind, no miles. Only the three of them, caught in the orbit of his obsession. Marla's eyes widened. Elias, the word was half plea, half disbelief. Connor stepped forward, protective but cautious. Stay back. Elias didn't move. His breathing was heavy but controlled, filled with the tension of every mile walked, every obstacle overcome. I came, he said, voice low, chilling, to make you see all of it. Every mile, every thought, every memory of what you did to me. The room seemed to shrink, air thickening with unspoken threats and memories. He had walked 740 miles to reach this moment, and nothing, no door, no lock, no fear, would stop him from finishing what he had started. Marla trembled, staring at the man who had once been hers completely and now existed as something unrecognizable, something terrifying. And in that trembling silence, the first confrontation of consequences and truth was inevitable. The room smelled of tension and rain-soaked earth, the small cabin of Marla's home now feeling like a crucible where the past and present collided. Elias stood in the center, his chest rising and falling with the rhythm of a predator who had hunted not for food but for vengeance. Marla's eyes were wide, glossy with tears, reflecting the fractured light from the flickering lamp. Connor was in front of her, protective, jaw tight, but every instinct told him he was outmatched by the intensity emanating from the man who had crossed 740 miles to reach them. Elias' voice broke the silence, low and tremulous. Do you know what it cost me to get here? Marla shook her head, words failing her. She had imagined confrontation 1,000 times, but not like this, raw, relentless, unfiltered. I survived storms, hunger, betrayal. I walked until my bones screamed, until my blood mixed with mud, until the world seemed to forget I existed, he said, eyes fixed on her. And all of it was because of you. Connor stepped forward, hand shaking slightly as he held Marla closer. You're not taking her, he said, though his voice lacked the certainty it had hours before. Elias didn't answer. He turned slowly, circling them, each step deliberate. Do you know what it means to love someone so completely, only to have them betray you? His tone carried the weight of years lost, of longing twisted into obsession. Do you know what it feels like to be erased from someone's life while they build a new one with someone else? Marla's throat ached, tears spilling freely. I never stopped caring for what we had, she whispered, voice barely audible. I was lonely. I made a mistake. I didn't think. Elias' eyes flickered, anger and grief interwoven. Mistake, he spat. Mistake? Every mile, every thought, every heartbeat brought me to you. And you moved on. You replaced me. Do you understand what that feels like? Connor's hand gripped hers tightly. Marla, he's not the man you knew. He's something else now. Elias froze, his gaze sharpening, seeing the man who had stepped into the void he thought he would never survive. But it wasn't Connor he hated. It was the memory of what he had lost, the betrayal etched into the edges of his mind like a permanent scar. The room was silent except for their breathing, heavy and unsteady. Outside, rain continued to patter against the roof, a rhythmic reminder that the world moved on even when life didn't. I didn't come to kill you, Elias said suddenly, his voice dropping, haunted. I came to make you see. To make you feel the weight of what you did. Marla flinched. I see it now. I feel it. The words hung in the air, fragile and trembling, a fleeting bridge between what was lost and what remained. For a moment, the fire of hatred cooled just enough to reveal something else, grief. A love warped by time, distance, and mistakes. Elias sank to the floor, head in his hands. The tension, the anger, the obsession, all began to unravel in the small, rain-darkened room. Marla and Connor stood frozen, unsure whether to move closer or flee. Outside, the night remained unbroken, but inside, the echoes of what was once love had settled over them like a thin, fragile veil. And somewhere deep in Elias' chest, beneath the fury and betrayal, the first stirrings of realization began. Some things, even love, could not survive the cost of obsession. The dawn crept slowly over Willow Creek, pale lights spilling across the rooftops, illuminating a town that had slept uneasily, unaware of the storm that had passed through the night. Inside the Rowan house, silence reigned. Elias sat slumped against the kitchen wall, face drawn, eyes hollow. The rage, the obsession, the 1,000 miles walked, all of it had collapsed into this stillness. Marla and Connor remained on the couch, hands intertwined, watching him carefully. Neither moved to approach, unsure if he would lash out again or dissolve entirely into the man he had become. Outside, the streets glimmered with morning dew, the only reminder of the world beyond the walls that had contained this living nightmare. Elias rubbed his forehead, trying to push away the tremors in his hands. For the first time since leaving prison, he realized the journey had been as much inside himself as along the highways and forests. Every mile had carried the weight of memory, anger, and desire, yet the final confrontation, this moment, left him empty in ways he had not expected. I thought I could fix it, he muttered, voice rough, barely audible. I thought if I walked, if I endured, if I reached you. His words trailed into a sigh that carried more defeat than sorrow. Marla swallowed, voice trembling. Elias, you can't undo what happened. We can't go back. But it doesn't have to end like it almost did. Please, look at me. He raised his eyes, meeting hers for the first time without the armor of anger. The recognition, the shared history, the betrayal, the love they had lost, shone there, fragile and tentative. Connor, ever the protector, spoke carefully. You don't have to hurt anyone anymore. You've walked miles and miles, but the last mile, the one that counts, it's the one you take toward letting go. Elias flinched, as if the words cut through something deeper than his legs, deeper than his heart. He had measured every mile, every step, every heartbeat in obsession, and yet the hardest step remained, release. He slid slowly to the floor, head resting on his knees, the quiet weight of realization pressing down. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he trembled, not from fatigue or pain, but from the sudden clarity of truth. He had walked 740 miles to confront Marla, yet he had not accounted for the humanity left in him, the capacity to stop before the final act of destruction. Marla edged closer, sitting beside him, hands brushing his arms in hesitant comfort. Elias, it's over. You made it here, and that's enough. You don't need to go any further. Outside, the morning light reflected off puddles in the yard, creating ripples that seemed to whisper of chance and forgiveness. The world moved forward, indifferent to the obsession that had consumed him, yet offering the quiet possibility of redemption. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of rain, wood, and life, a combination he hadn't realized he had missed so desperately. The miles behind him no longer measured his rage or revenge. They measured endurance, endurance that finally ended not in violence but in surrender to what could not be changed. Connor exhaled, easing the tension in his shoulders, allowing a fragile peace to settle over the small room. You're alive, he said softly. That's what matters now. Elias nodded, small, almost imperceptible. The obsessive march had ended. The final mile, the one he had carried in his mind for months, one that could have destroyed everything, was never taken. Instead, he had chosen the path he had never considered: to stop, to let the world keep turning, and to leave the past where it belonged. The rain stopped. Sunlight strengthened, filtering through the curtains. For the first time since he escaped, Elias felt the weight lift, replaced by the quiet ache of what remained: memory, loss, and the fragile, enduring thread of humanity that had guided him home. No more miles. No more steps toward vengeance. Only the stillness of survival, and the choice to live with what was left of love. The road ahead remained uncertain, but at last, it was one he could walk without destroying everything in his path. The end.